When an arrogant billionaire heiress mocked a black janitor, "If you can play that piano, I'll marry you." She had no idea. That night would become the greatest shock of her life. That night, Boston glowed with a cold, brilliant light. Outside the Commonwealth Grand Hotel, spotlights cut across the red carpet, and the flash of cameras was a constant percussive storm. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers dripped golden light onto marble floors, where evening gowns swirled past tuxedos with carefully rehearsed smiles. It was a typical high society charity gala, where tales of generosity flowed as smoothly as the champagne, and the hands that had polished the floors since dawn were meant to be invisible. Samuel Jones pushed his cleaning cart along a service corridor, the rags folded with the same precision he'd maintained for 5 years working here. He knew the silent language of this place. The cool, brief nods, the eyes that looked just past your shoulder, the way footsteps would subtly shift to keep you out of the camera's frame. A PR staffer, clipboard in hand, swept by, tilting her chin slightly. "Let's make sure all staff stays out of the shot. Thanks." Her tone was neither harsh nor unkind. It was simply stated as a law of nature, as if the lights were designed to shine only on certain people. At the start of his shift, the manager had said, "Samuel, use the service elevator, buddy. Don't cross the main hall while guests are being photographed." The word buddy sounded friendly but also distant, a convenient way to avoid reading the gleaming Samuel on his name badge. A security guard happened to walk in the same direction. His glance wasn't hostile, just trained, scanning, preventing, monitoring. Samuel showed his staff ID with a polite smile. The man nodded and walked on. But when Samuel skirted the edge of the main hall to collect a few empty glasses, the sound of polished black dress shoes followed him for a few beats. A silent escort. On a small stage at the far end of the room sat a Steinway & Sons Model D, still and elegant like a promise. The polished black surface caught the chandelier's light, scattering it into 1,000 tiny stars. Samuel paused, not because he was tired, but because a memory brushed against him. The scent of polished wood, the cool touch of ivory keys under his fingertips. He turned away. He was here to clean, not to play. The crowd flowed around him like a river. A society matron halted when Samuel happened to step near the camera's edge. "Excuse me, go around, please." A man beckoned with a subtle wave. "Hey, you." Samuel turned. "Yes, sir. My name's Samuel." The man held out a set of car keys, pointing toward the entrance. "Where's valet?" "Sir, I'm with the maintenance staff. Valet is at the front entrance." The man gave a flat, "Ah!" and let his gaze slide off Samuel's face as if it had touched glass. Samuel was used to it. Here, slipping out of sight was a survival skill. Moving slowly at the carpet's edge, avoiding the camera's eye, circling around columns, always making sure he was the last one through a doorway, so no one had to step aside for him. Occasionally, someone would mutter behind him, "You don't belong here." It was never addressed to him directly, just to the air shaped like him as he passed by. He collected glasses, replaced ashtrays, wiped table edges. Another PR assistant hurried by, adjusting a velvet rope. "Staff, please stay behind the photo line." "Understood," Samuel replied, his voice as flat as the freshly polished floor. Martha, the veteran housekeeper, passed by and set a small bottle of water on his cart. "Samuel, take a break. Hydrate." "I'm fine, Miss Martha." She looked at him a moment longer, as if she wanted to say something more, but knew better than to say it in a crowded hall. From the grand doors, a new group of guests entered under a choreography of lights. Smile, flash, turn, flash. Fingers touched the stems of wine glasses. Eleanor Vance emerged at the center of it, her cobalt blue silk gown catching the light like a sculpted flame. A river of diamonds flickered along her collarbone and wrist. She strode to the microphone, her voice firm and bright as polished glass. "We are here tonight to remind each other that hope always has a place. I trust everyone will be generous." The applause was polite, blending with the scent of expensive perfume and champagne. The same security guard trailed Samuel as he kept to the edge of the hall. No one had told him to. It just happened. Part of a collective, unspoken reflex. When Samuel bent to pick up an empty glass, he caught his own reflection in a wall mirror. Navy blue shirt, black gloves, calm eyes trained over years. On the far side of the glass lay a neat story of kindness and charity. On his side was the man who polished those stories until they gleamed. A young woman holding her phone paused where Samuel stood. Sorry, could you move?" She didn't look at his name tag. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Samuel. I'll step aside." His name fell softly between strands of background music, so light it seemed no one heard it. He stopped at the edge of the stage, scanning the table setup. Napkins folded precisely, glass count correct, ashtrays under half full. Another security guard approached with a polite smile. "Sir, this area is for guests." "Yes, I'll be out once I check the glasses." "Thank you." The smile wasn't unfriendly, it just had a thin layer of default suspicion. From the mic, the PR host announced the schedule: speeches, an art auction, then a special piano performance by a guest artist. Samuel glanced at the Steinway again. From somewhere, his old teacher's voice whispered, "Don't count the keys, feel the music." He shook his head. Here, feelings weren't his job. Invisibility was. A couple walked past, the man squinting. "Hey, buddy, spill over there." Samuel turned. "Yes, I'll get it right away." He moved like a shadow over the marble. Every motion was calculated to be smaller than the room. Shoulders lowered, elbows tucked, standing at an angle to give way. He had learned to exist like a ripple, present everywhere, but gone from every frame. Once in a while, a pang hit him when the piano was tested. 3 scattered chords, someone pressing the pedal. The sound was full, deep, recalling nights he sat at a piano until his fingertips numbed, trying to place a melody exactly where it belonged on the score of his life. Now that melody sat behind a door, he had locked himself. The key, he thought, was lost somewhere on the road to becoming someone no one needed to notice. "Samuel, service route," the manager reminded, eyes flicking towards the photo corner where donors lined up their smiles. "Don't cross the main hall." "Yes, sir." Samuel turned toward the service elevator. At the narrow junction of 2 corridors, he paused, not from fatigue, but to swallow something unnamed. Then he moved on. The gala was running like clockwork, speeches on cue, laughter in the right places, cameras at the right angles. Invisibility ran just as smoothly. Staff took the back route. Names blurred into buddy or you, eyes reminding you, you don't belong here. Every piece fit neatly into the gleaming machine. Only Samuel, in a brief moment before the service door closed, looked back at the Steinway. The chandelier's light spilled over the piano's surface, pooling into a quiet glow. He exhaled softly, as if placing a small stone into a river. Then he pushed his cart inside, the door closing behind him, quiet as a blink. Dignity has no uniform, it has courage. The service elevator door had barely closed softly behind him when Samuel steered his cart back towards the edge of the hall to collect the last few glasses before the speeches began. Everything was running on schedule, and he knew a single scratch in the flow could shift the entire tone of the room. A PR woman, clipboard in hand, swept past, speaking as if to the air. "Remember, keep staff out of the photo line. Across the room, a security guard unconsciously matched Samuel's movements without needing any orders. In the camera's circle of light, Eleanor Vance stood as if she were the fixed point of a carefully drawn graph. The cobalt blue silk gown clung perfectly, diamonds catching the light, her smile set to the correct angle. In her head ran a list of risks: a major shareholder irritated by last week's labor dispute, an unpredictable journalist present tonight, a new donor who needed wooing. The speech outline, the camera angles, who stood with whom, what must not happen. She knew them all by heart, like multiplication tables. What she didn't factor in was the human element outside the plan. Samuel bent on one knee, reaching for a glass that had rolled deep under a table. He straightened just as Eleanor turned away from a camera, flicking her wrist. Champagne splashed in a golden streak across the blue silk. A breathless second passed before the room's attention shifted, eyes converging, phones lifting. "What the hell are you doing?" Eleanor's voice cracked, sharp as glass. Samuel placed the glass on his cart, straightened, and opened his hands as if to steady the air in the room. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Sorry?" she cut in. "You stained this dress. Do you have any idea how much it costs?" The question wasn't meant to be answered. It measured the gap between someone entitled to demand and someone who needed permission to exist. A businessman smirked. No janitor could cover a scratch on that dress. Laughter rippled on instinct. Another voice, loud enough to be heard. "People like you should stick to the back." The security guard stepped closer, not to threaten, just standing like a period at the end of an accusation. Samuel kept his voice even. "I can cover the dry cleaning bill, ma'am." He knew the words were as thin as tissue. A month's wages wouldn't survive a boutique invoice. For Eleanor, the fatigue of living in a cage of expectations condensed into a reflex. Reclaim control. She half-turned, pulling the room's attention back to herself. "How about this?" she said, her voice a command redirecting the crowd. "If you can play that piano better than a professional, I'll marry you." She smiled, the sound cold and sharp. A beat of silence, then the room erupted. Someone joked, "Careful, there are more white keys than black." A few token shhs, but eyes kept smiling. The harmless joke slid neatly into an old mental groove, race wrapped in laughter to avoid naming it. Standing at the fringe, Martha tightened her hold on a stack of napkins. She looked at Samuel, then at Eleanor. She recognized that look. Someone who had never had to ask themselves whether they were allowed to stand here. "No need to make this a big deal, just a little accident," a woman said, but the cameras stayed up. Samuel could have slipped into the service hall as always, becoming a gap for the wave to glide past. But tonight, something in him refused to retreat. "I don't need you to marry me," Samuel said, eyes steady, his voice low but clear. "If I can do it, I want you to keep your word." A few chuckles shot out, testing how serious he was. Eleanor arched a brow, trying to reel the moment back into a joke. "Perfect. Show us, buddy." She pressed the word buddy like a stamp. One more way to avoid saying his name. "Let's make a wager on it," a guest shouted. Another called out, $500 says he can't get through the song perfectly." A third guest laughed with contempt. "I'll bet $1,000 he can't even play for 30 seconds. Around the room, wallets snapped open as people pulled out cash. By turning his potential failure into a game, it gave them a clean excuse to enjoy the show without admitting they were all participating in a man's public humiliation. The PR woman glanced at Eleanor. A second's frown, then a thin smile. If framed right, the clip could boost reach. In Eleanor's mind, goodwill charts, audience reach, and headline potential flickered past. She'd learned to measure everything in numbers and had forgotten how to measure in people. Samuel shook his head when the bills were pushed toward him. I'm not taking your money. Then what do you want? Just one thing. If I do it, you'll remember every word you just said in front of everyone here. A thin pause. Eleanor laughed longer this time, confident she still owned the story. Deal. Plenty of witnesses here. She pointed toward the stage. That piano. The whole city's ready to watch you. The security guard walked in parallel, escorting a moving Risk. Arthur Finch, the music critic, stood still like a comma, observing how a smirk could rewrite a person. He looked at the Steinway, then at Samuel, his eyes flickering with anticipation. Come on, someone urged, smiling as thin as a blade. Don't keep us waiting. Lots of white keys. More laughter, loud but cold. Eleanor adjusted her gown. For a split second, her gaze touched Samuel, not as a person, but as a prop to be assessed. Deep down, the fatigue was still there. Urgent emails, early meetings, shareholder pressure, but she'd chosen to let that exhaustion spill into power. And power without restraint always finds the lowest surface to pour onto. Samuel inhaled. He set the cart to the side, removed his gloves, folding them neatly. All the habits of making himself smaller than the room, he performed them one last time before stepping into the space opened by eyes and cameras, a space waiting for a fall. After you, Eleanor said, her voice smooth but cold. Time to prove it, buddy. The room swelled with an ooh of excitement. At the crowd's edge, Martha gave the smallest shake of her head. Only Samuel saw it. Arthur Finch stepped half a pace forward, hand in his suit pocket, ready to witness ability, not spectacle. Samuel walked. The sound of his soles on the marble barely carried, but each step seemed to reset the room's center of gravity. At the end of the path, the black Steinway & Sons Model D lay still, its lid catching the chandelier's light into its own private sky. The laughter hadn't fully faded, still falling here and there like late hail. But beneath the noise, a thin silence began to form. A space just wide enough for music, if it came. Samuel placed a hand on the stage edge. The guard stopped at the perimeter, not advancing. The PR woman stepped back half a pace, camera still rolling. Eleanor kept her chin high, convinced she still controlled the moment. But for the first time that night, Samuel wasn't trying to make himself smaller. He simply stood at the full size of a man. My name is Samuel, he said, loud enough for the first rows to hear. Not Buddy. Then he stepped up onto the wooden riser, heading towards the piano. The way a person approaches a real conversation, not a sideshow. From that moment, the night shifted, and the marriage dare that had sounded like a joke was hardening into a binding promise in front of a room full of witnesses. What came next would no longer be entertainment. It would be a test of dignity, talent, and one's word. Right after the calm statement, "My name is Samuel, not Buddy," the room seemed to drop a notch in noise. He kept walking, each step on the marble even and deliberate. Not fast, not slow, as if he were resetting the dimensions of himself in a space that was never meant for him. A stack of bills slid forward, the snap of wallets opening. "Let's make a wager on it," a guest shouted. Another called out, $500 says he can't get through the song perfectly. A third guest laughed with contempt. "I'll bet $1,000 he can't even play for 30 seconds. Around the room, wallets snapped open as people pulled out cash. By turning his potential failure into a game, it gave them a clean excuse to enjoy the show without admitting they were all participating in a man's public humiliation. Samuel didn't look at the money. "I'm not here to perform like a trained pet. I'm not taking your bets." Then he turned toward the one who had issued the dare. "I accept, and I only want one thing. If I succeed, Miss Vance will keep her word in front of everyone here." A few whistles rang out, half mocking, half testing. Eleanor Vance lifted her chin, her smile locking into place. In her mind, the risk chart scrolled fast. Last week's labor lawsuit, an unpredictable journalist present, a new donor to impress. She thought in graphs and headlines, not in people. If he failed, the whole room laughed. Done. If he was decent, spin the narrative into a night of discovering hidden talent. What she wasn't used to was an employee demanding that she keep her word. Samuel reached the foot of the stage. 2 security guards immediately stepped in, blocking him out of habit. "Sir, this area is for performers and guests only." The tone was polite, the boundary soft but real. Samuel stopped, didn't argue. He tilted his head so they could see to the left. A white couple was leaning happily over the stage edge, taking selfies with the Steinway in the background. No one stopped them. The guards hesitated for a beat, then returned to their positions in front of Samuel. The small moment laid bare the skew in the room. Same rule, enforced for only one person. At the edge of the hall, Martha saw it, her lips pressing together. This wasn't the first time. A deep, clear male voice cut in. "Let him through." Arthur Finch, the music critic, had been standing nearby. He didn't raise his voice, just shifted his shoulders slightly. "Tonight I want to hear music, not watch barricades move." The guards glanced at each other, then stepped half aside, opening the path but still flanking him, as if escorting a risk in motion. Eleanor's brow tightened just slightly. She didn't like anyone else setting the rhythm. The PR rep touched her sleeve and murmured, "Better if Finch speaks up. Adds legitimacy." Eleanor inhaled, returned her smile to its trained setting, the one she'd perfected all her life, turning emotion into procedure. A female guest muttered, "They should clean the piano too, all that sweat." A light touch, bitter underneath. A polite remark carrying baked-in bias. Samuel removed his gloves, folded them neatly onto a tray. A small, decisive gesture like shedding an invisible uniform. He looked up at Eleanor. "Let's confirm one last time. You said if I play better than a professional pianist, you'll marry me. I don't want that. I want you to keep your word in whatever way you can, publicly." A male guest laughed. "Smart, customizing the prize." Another added, "Keep her word? How? Write a check?" Samuel shook his head. "I don't need a check. I need proof that words here carry weight." Arthur Finch nodded. "You're talking about public accountability." "Yes." In Eleanor's eyes, a flicker of hesitation. Then it was gone. Around the room, phones were raised. Tiny lights blinked. The risk chart ran again. Labor hashtags, conservative shareholders. She smiled, stamping it shut. "We're all witnesses here." Arthur Finch followed, "And if he plays at a professional level, I'll say so to the press." A few short bursts of applause. Part of the room was ready to value principle, not just spectacle. Samuel nodded, stepped onto the riser. One guard instinctively shifted closer. Samuel didn't look at him, only at the path ahead. For years, it had always been blocked by mechanisms dressed in courtesy. Tonight, he was walking through under his own name. "Let him through," Arthur Finch repeated, as if placing a period at the end of the sentence. The guard froze, then moved to the edge. Below, the selfie couple still joked about white keys, black keys. No one shushed them. The entire room's eyes were on one man, and its expectations gathered for a fall. Samuel stood before the Steinway & Sons Model D. He placed his palm on the lid. Cool, solid, familiar. He didn't open it yet. He looked down, calling the challenger by name. "Miss Vance, I want to hear you say one thing clearly. I will keep my word." For the first time that evening, Eleanor missed half a beat. She wasn't used to reading lines someone else had written, but in front of too many cameras, with the PR rep nodding for her to lock the narrative, she lifted her chin. I will keep my word. The final syllable was thin as wire. It was both a promise and a fence. Martha released a breath only Samuel noticed. He lifted the lid. The hinge gave a soft, clean click. In the front row, a woman whispered to her friend, "What if he really can play?" The friend shrugged. "Then we've got a good story." They still spoke about a story, not a man. Eleanor kept her smile, her thumb brushing the now dry champagne stain. The fatigue at the base of her neck, day-long meetings, urgent emails, difficult shareholders had been poured into a dare as easy as snapping her fingers. A discordant thought crossed her mind. Why had she tossed that line so easily? Then the PR logic covered it again. If he's good, we discover talent. If he's bad, the room laughs. Win-win. Somewhere the word dignity still waited outside the door. Samuel pulled the bench out and sat. He checked his distance from the keys, dropped his shoulders, loosened his wrists. Old rituals returning like muscle memory. He spoke loud enough for the first rows to hear. "Thank you for making way." It sounded polite, but anyone hit by it would understand. He was speaking to the guards and to a system that had long kept him at the hall's edge. The crowd steadied itself with a few jibes. "Get on with it. Don't keep us waiting." At the fringe, the man from earlier murmured, "Look, his hands are shaking." His friend replied, "Of course they are. Who wouldn't be?" Arthur Finch gave a small smile. "Shaking or not, the music will answer." Samuel set his fingertips on the keys, just touching, not pressing. The air felt taut and thin, as if waiting for a snap. He had refused the money, made "I will keep my word" echo in front of witnesses, and walked through the barrier under his own name. All that remained was the sound of the piano. All that remained was the sound of the piano. And when it came, it arrived not with noise, but with a breath that seemed to touch the air itself. Samuel struck the first key, as if tapping gently on the surface of water. No showy vibrato, no flourished runs. Just a clean note, then a second that opened the door for "summertime" to step in. He chose a tempo half a beat slower than usual, giving each phrase room to breathe. His left hand laid down a soft foundation, like bare feet on a summer sidewalk. His right hand spoke sparingly, each note falling with exactly the weight it needed. The pedal was pressed briefly, released quickly, letting the resonance cling to the marble of the hall before dissolving like mist. Samuel wasn't telling a story. He was setting down sentences. The silence between them didn't block the listener's ears. It invited them closer. In the second row, the man who had joked about white keys, black keys, left his smile hanging mid-air. Then it folded in on itself, extinguished like a candle capped under glass. His champagne stopped trembling. A woman recording the video tapped her phone off, laying it face down as if afraid to make a noise. The room's laughter didn't vanish instantly. It shrank, dried, and rolled to the edges. Arthur Finch leaned forward, his trained eye missing nothing. The way Samuel anchored a low note to keep the line centered, the way he sidestepped flashy technical riffs in favor of restraint. Beautiful touch, warm tone. Not a warmth achieved through tricks, but through intent. A player who knows what he's saying, and to whom. Arthur noted how Samuel bent two blue notes at just the right moments, holding and releasing them so that a familiar melody became strange again. In the front row, Eleanor Vance kept her polite smile, but her jaw softened a notch. She had prepared two neat scenarios to spin the narrative, yet this sound belonged to neither. From a thin seam in her memory, she saw herself at 10, sitting at the old upright at home, her elderly teacher pressing her hand down and saying, "Silence is also a note, young lady." Eleanor had hated that lesson. Back then, silence meant absence. No money, no power, no applause. But now, the silence Samuel poured into the room carried a different weight. The Steinway answered him as if it had known him for years. In the bridge, Samuel tilted the harmony into shade. Not darkness, just depth. He held a single note long enough for people to realize they were waiting, and that moment shifted the room from a crowd hungry for spectacle into an audience listening. Servers slowed their steps. Security guards lowered their shoulders. The PR rep, for the first time all night, stopped checking her mental dashboard. Samuel looked at no one. His posture was calm. Shoulders dropped, back easy, eyes sometimes half closed, not in a performance affectation, but because he was listening to the way the notes touched the walls, echoing back like waves. He wasn't presenting himself. He was returning to himself. Each phrase he laid down rewrote a line on a resume that had been crossed out. No more buddy, no more you, no more people like you. Here, in this moment, was Samuel Jones, a man with a name, with a voice. From her spot at the edge of the hall, Martha's eyes glistened. When Samuel slid into a small ornament, she thought of all the mornings she'd watched the staff clock in, each carrying a life no one bothered to ask about. She felt this music walk alongside them, as if someone had stepped out from the service hallway, set a chair in the middle of the red carpet, and said, "Sit. Tell me." Somewhere across the room, the hum of the HVAC, background noise everyone had lived with, vanished from consciousness. The man with the cigar lowered his hand. A woman adjusted her shawl and forgot to finish, leaving her fingers resting idly in her lap. Someone started to sigh, then stopped, afraid to spill whatever delicate drop was balanced on the rim of the moment. Eleanor glanced at the patch of champagne on her gown, now dried into a thin ridge. She wanted to think about image damage and media opportunity, but the thought refused to flow. She realized she had no ready words for this. She had believed everything could be labeled: KPI, ROI, sentiment. But this music was labeling her back. Not heiress, not future CEO, not a net worth package. It called a person out from behind the glass. The sensation was as unsettling as touching a place she hadn't in years. Samuel circled a short variation, then let go of the urge to display. He stopped before the coda, as if standing at a crossroads. He chose the simpler road home, returning the melody to where it began, without embellishment. It was a cultural decision. Summertime in his hands wasn't a finger exercise. It was a doorway into a current of memory. Porches in summer, front steps, voices that softened the edges of a long day. He didn't need to say black culture. Anyone with ears could hear its current. For a moment, he looked up and caught Martha's eyes. No smile, no nod, just a glance that confirmed he knew she was there, and therefore knew that all the people like her, those hands that polished floors to a gleam since dawn, were here too. Arthur Finch listened closely enough to notice what wasn't played. He silently counted the length of the pause between phrases, the way Samuel returned to the tonic without weight. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice. He dipped his head slightly, as if accepting an invisible handshake. Maturity in music lies not in adding more, but in leaving more out. When the final note fell, Samuel lifted the pedal, letting the sound die away completely. No exclamation point, no fireworks, just a small round period. And then, silence. Not the awkward silence of a spilled champagne moment, not the empty silence of nothing to say. This silence had changed color. Deep, warm, present. The room seemed to inhale all at once. A single clap rang out, then halted, like someone knocking but remembering someone was asleep. Samuel didn't turn toward the audience to seek approval. He sat still, hands loose in his lap, eyes on no one in particular. His posture said the rest. I am not here to prove. I am here to name himself, to name those just pushed out of the frame, to name the dignity that wears no uniform. In the front row, Eleanor felt a voice inside her, one she usually smothered with her calendar, stir. What have I just done to this man? The question didn't stop at Samuel. It swept back over all the staff she passed without seeing each day, over the emails requesting, use the service elevator, stay out of the photo line. It left a thin chill at her neck. She looked up at the chandelier, the light that had always sided with her, and for the first time that night, she saw it as neutral. A young server, tray in hand, stood frozen as if spellbound. She swallowed hard, eyes shining for reasons she couldn't name. Beside her, the guard who had instinctively blocked Samuel let his elbows drop. He didn't apologize, didn't need to. The silence was doing it for him. Samuel touched a small closing chord, not to prolong, but to set the room back on the ground after the bend it had just taken. Then he lifted his hands from the keys, lowered the lid one notch without closing it. He turned his head to find Arthur Finch. They didn't speak. A single nod held the whole sentence, I'm still here. Any laughter, if it still existed, was now at the margins. At the room's heart was a new quiet, one both carved by the music and left behind like soil for the next thing to grow. In that place, jokes about white and black keys had no space because people had just heard something beyond the color of the keys. Samuel inhaled, exhaled. He didn't rise. He let the room reset its heartbeat. And in the front row, Eleanor, the hostess who had tossed a marriage dare like a stone into a pond, felt every ripple come back to the shore where she stood. She understood. From here on, every word she spoke would have to pass through this silence. The first piece was over. The room had changed color, and the control, what Eleanor had thought was hers, was quietly sliding toward the piano. The transformed silence hadn't yet faded when Samuel tilted his head, as if listening to the room one more time. He didn't stand. He simply rolled his wrists, reset his distance from the keys, and changed languages, from the lull of summer to the clean architecture of the classics. A sonata, the skeleton of discipline, came to life. The opening theme was crisp, clear, allegro con moto. Samuel's left hand built a rhythmic wall with evenly rolled chords, mechanical in precision, but never overpowering. His right hand drew a thin, cantable line, delicate yet sinewed. He used the pedal sparingly, releasing it exactly at the cutoff points, so each movement revealed its structure instead of being cloaked in a fog of emotion. In the transition, he staged a dialogue between the two hands, a 3-2 cross rhythm meshing like gears. Every accent landed just enough to support the next phrase, never forcing it. The room, so used to being served sensations, found itself unconsciously counting with him. The man with the cigar lowered it from his lips, setting it carefully into the ashtray, as if smoke might smudge the clean lines. An older woman tilted her head, narrowing her eyes, the reflex of someone who'd once studied piano, checking the voicing. In the back row, a young man lowered his phone, forgetting vertical mode entirely. Perhaps the clip no longer seemed enough. Arthur Finch shifted half a foot, leaning in to catch more of the mid-range. He noted the rare control. Smooth legato on the 4th and 5th fingers, trills clean without stray notes, the peep to F climb without a gasp. In the development section, Samuel carved the theme into fragments, rotated and reassembled them. The arc of dynamics rose by intellect, not adrenaline. Arthur exhaled softly, almost to himself. Virtuoso. The word fell in 2 beats, cautious, then certain. Samuel wasn't trying to steal hearts. He was building a bridge. Those who had come for sport understood halfway across they were standing before art. The faint shifting of chairs subsided. The guard who had stepped in to block him earlier lowered his shoulders. For the first time that night, his eyes were not watchful, but following. Eleanor Vance sat upright, the smile on her face like an old mask. With each phrase, she felt the invisible dashboard in her mind, KPIs, headlines, sentiment, lose signal for a few seconds before flickering back. She glanced at the PR rep. That's enough, isn't it? The other's eyes wavered. If we cut at the peak, we'll be crucified. Eleanor bristled at a situation she didn't control. She wanted to put down the period, to bring the night back onto the outline she'd planned. In the coda, Samuel let the arpeggios pass like a draft of wind, breaking on the dynamic stair just before a forte, then refusing to step on it. He returned to mezzo piano, closing the phrase with a cadence as clean as a boundary line. This was the power of control, knowing where you could be loud and choosing not to be. Another silence. This time applause erupted instantly afterward, sharp and full, not the polite clapping of a gala. This was recognition. A few people half rose. Then one whole row stood. Prejudice hadn't vanished. It had simply stepped back, glancing around for allies. Arthur Finch lowered his chin by exactly a centimeter, a professional's gesture. He angled slightly toward the waiting cameras. Professional standard. No waving hands, no exaggeration. A line of invisible text had just been signed and sealed. A few reporters exchanged looks. They had their pull quote. Eleanor felt control slipping away like sand through her fingers. She stood in the natural pause, clipped the mic to her lapel. "Thank you," she began, voice smooth as glass. "A truly impressive performance. Now let's—" Her words were drowned by a lone shout. "More! Another one! Encore!" The crowd, which she had steered from the start of the night, was now choosing its own path. The PR rep swiveled toward her. "Let him do one more, Eleanor." She pressed her jaw, thumb unconsciously rubbing the dried champagne stain. "Back to work," Eleanor said quietly. Mick off, aimed only at Samuel, her last attempt to snap the reins. Samuel looked at her for a beat, not defiant, not submissive, just looking. The gaze wasn't hot, but it had an edge. "You just said you'd keep your word." In the front row, a few guests turned to each other. They had heard her enough, even without the mic. Her face had said it. An older woman, silent until now, spoke up clearly. "We'd like to hear more." A heavy-set man who'd eagerly bet earlier nodded rapidly. "Yes, more." The young man in the back turned his camera on again, but this time to record music, not a stumble. The guard glanced at his superior. The latter shrugged and moved to the edge. The room's center of gravity had shifted away from the hostess, toward the man at the piano. Eleanor set the mic down, her smile returning but thinner, almost transparent. Inside, she heard a faint crack. The image, the shell she lived in, fracturing at the seam. She worried about shareholders, about tomorrow's headlines, about dinner with the donor. But at the same time, an uninvited question came. Why do I want to cut this short? The schedule? Or because I can't stand that someone who doesn't belong here just redefined the room? Samuel swiveled his bench slightly, staying on stage. He looked over the rows, calling for more, not to collect approving eyes, but to gauge the breath. He found Arthur Finch. They caught each other's gaze amid the murmurs. Arthur gave a small nod. Another invisible signature. Samuel placed his hands on the keys. But before playing, he said, "Just loud enough for the first rows to hear. Thank you. I won't make you noisier. I'll let the music do its part." He inclined his head toward Eleanor, a polite gesture without submission. "I respect you, and I remember your word." He queued up the third piece in his mind, one that would drain both his technique and stamina. But he didn't rush. Silence had just learned its job. Let it work one more beat. Phones lifted again, but the angles had changed. Now people were aiming for the entrance, not the fall. At the edge, Martha laid a hand over her heart, a smile just beginning at her lips. She saw the other servers standing a little straighter, as if the spine of the whole evening shift had been realigned. The guard who had often blocked Samuel stepped back another half-pace, not in fear, but as if not to blur the outline taking shape. Eleanor sat down. The PR rep whispered the revised schedule. "We'll call this a special set. After this next piece, you step in to thank him and announce the auction." Eleanor nodded, eyes never leaving Samuel's hands. She didn't know if she was hoping he'd stumble so she could reclaim control or soar so she wouldn't have to hold it anymore. Samuel lowered his wrists. The opening theme of the next piece hadn't sounded yet, but the room was already leaning toward the piano. Somewhere, the feeling of sport had slipped from the grip. What remained was art and the people standing before it, no longer hiding behind their roles. He closed his eyes for half a second, just enough to hear the clock inside click into place. Then he opened them, struck the first note. The room, like a sail catching the perfect wind, swelled, and the night decisively shifted into a new orbit. The very first note landed, and the entire room leaned towards the piano. Samuel locked the door behind any lingering doubt. No more lullabies, no more separate architecture of discipline. He chose an extreme technical piece. Steep double-note passages, long octave leaps, razor-close hand crossings, shifting 3 to 4 to 6 polyrhythms trading rolls without pause. This wasn't a piece to sound pretty. It was a summit that demanded both muscle and nerve. His left hand drove an ostinato smooth as a belt drive. His right hand strung staccato beads as precise as a sewing machine. In the second section, he bent the theme into a left-hand trill, a difficult, rarely chosen move, while the right hand walked the high register like a tightrope walker. The pedal was dotted only at phrase openings, lifted before any clouding could occur. Even on repeated note runs, he used a wrist rotary instead of the arm, keeping the speed without breaking the sound. Everything was control, no strain showing. The audience held its breath in the face of visible difficulty. The man who had once joked about white keys, black keys, drew his hand away from his glass. The security guard who had blocked Samuel earlier was now unconsciously leaning forward. Martha gripped the edge of a table, the pulse in her wrist clear in each beat. The PR woman looked up from her screen, abandoning an unsent text. Laughter had slipped out of the room long ago. What remained was attention. Eleanor Vance tried to erect a mental fence quickly. This was her event. This was her story to tell. If necessary, cut. But the music belonged to no fence. It took its own route, through the chandeliers, through the cameras, past the KPI formulas. In the coda, Samuel pushed a tremolo octave to the lip of fortissimo, then didn't break through. He reined it in, detoured into a short glissando, returning the phrase to piano like a graceful stop command. The break was so smooth that the whole hall felt as if it slid half a step further. Silence. One beat, two, then an explosion. Then, a thick, unified standing ovation erupted. The front row stood, then the back. Chairs clattered, glasses chimed, but no one cared. Phones rose like a forest, no longer hunting for a fall, but holding on to a moment. At the stage's edge, Arthur Finch clapped half a beat slower than the rest, as if to measure it precisely, then spoke just loud enough to be caught by someone's recording mic. At a very high professional level, Samuel remained seated, hands loose. He didn't bow yet. He gave the room back to itself. The commotion belonged to them. Eleanor took the mic. "Thank you," she began, but the clapping didn't drop. One group of guests shouted, "Encore!" Another called, "Samuel!" She tried again, her voice smooth. This time the applause surged like a wave. Not hostile, just not hers in this moment. The PR rep whispered at her shoulder, "Don't cut it now." Her phone buzzed constantly. Internal messages, social media tags, an email from legal counsel. Avoid binding statements. Marriage is a personal legal matter. From mid-hall, a man's voice rang out. "You said you'd marry him if he played better than a pro." Another followed. "Keep your word." Several cameras pivoted up to her face, stage lights catching the rise and fall of her collarbones with each breath. She remembered exactly the "I will keep my word" she'd said earlier, words Samuel had made her repeat. They felt like a lock now, clasped around her wrist. Not a legal shackle, but a moral one. In her head, two dashboards crashed into each other. Reputation, shareholders, donors, lawyers, marital clauses on one side. A room full of witnesses, a respected critic's professional level on the other, and a video already on fire. She knew legally the joke meant nothing. Marriage couldn't be coerced. She could dismiss it as hyperbole. But in the court of public ethics, she was cornered. Refuge in that, and the story became heiress promises, then reneges. She was locked into a personal decision, irrational, dangerous. Samuel rose just as the clapping dipped a notch. He didn't walk toward the mic. He bowed slightly, enough to honor the room standing. Then he looked straight at Eleanor. No demand, no pressure, just the reminder in his gaze. The words are on your side. Arthur Finch stepped half out of his row, speaking at a clip-worthy volume. From a professional standpoint, he just performed at a level I'd gladly put my name to in print. No more, no less. It was exactly the stamp that tightened the moral lock. A few donor faces turned to each other. They knew Finch's words had weight. The PR rep nudged the mic toward Eleanor. "We talk about keeping one's word and supporting talent. Flip the narrative." Her phone lit up again. An investor asking, "What's going on?" A journalist requesting a statement. Corporate counsel texting, "Do not confirm intent to marry." Eleanor flashed back to her teens, the first time she was told, "Don't let anyone steer you. Keep your hands on the wheel." Now the music was steering. "We'll pause here," she tried, but another corner of the room answered, "No, more." The crowd wasn't rude. They were united. And that unity, through applause, through the critic's signature, was demanding she face her own words. Samuel lifted his hand, signaling for quiet one more moment. He said, "Just enough. I don't need a wedding. I need people to keep their word." The line reframed the debate out of marital law back into the ethics of speech. Something everyone understood, everyone could judge. An older woman, clear-voiced with authority, called out, "You can keep your word another way, but you have to keep it." Several heads nodded. A way out cracked open. No forced marriage, but no broken promise either. Eleanor swallowed hard. She wasn't cruel. She was trained to win. And winning, in her dictionary, meant never losing control. In this moment, she had to learn a new word. Right. Not the right move, but the right thing. A second standing ovation rose, this one for the night's redefinition. Even the security guard clapped, offbeat but genuine. Martha dabbed the corner of her eye with the edge of a napkin. Arthur Finch pocketed his phone as if submitting his testimony. At the edge of the hall, an elderly lady squinted. "I know him." Her neighbor leaned in. "I think he used to be at the conservatory. Samuel Jones." The words threaded into the taut fabric of the night, a cut that would drop the next act, revealing his identity and past. Eleanor heard conservatory and felt her neck tighten. If the story turned into forgotten prodigy, every eye would swing back to judge her, not just for a cruel joke, but for abuse of power. She set the mic down and took a long breath. Before her was no longer a gala, it was an ethics trial, and the jury, already standing, was staring right at her. Samuel returned to the piano, resting his hands on the lid as if closing the file on his performance. He didn't take the mic. He let the silence do the next job, forcing the room's power holders to hear the sound of their own breathing. The room stayed still for one more beat, as if to confirm, from here on, every word would carry weight. It was in that silence, freshly reset to give weight to words, that an older woman's voice rose softly from the edge of the hall. "I know him." Heads turned. She stepped forward half a pace, adjusted her glasses. Samuel Jones." The name slipped free of the "buddy" and "you" labels and dropped into the room like a latch clicking shut. A few people mouthed it back to themselves, tasting a returned identity. "He performed at Symphony Hall when he was 22, she said firmly. "That encore, I remember it perfectly." A silver-haired man in gold frames nodded. "Yes, the Globe called him a new talent." A younger guest pulled out his phone, typed quickly. The screen lit up with an old photo. A young man in a black suit, bowing before a piano. Arthur Finch narrowed his eyes, digging through his professional memory. "I read that review, and I remember a master class. My teacher mentioned your name." He turned to Samuel, nodding slightly, as if confirming a thread that had never truly broken. Eleanor Vance's breath stuttered half a beat. She looked to the PR rep for info. The other checked her phone, whispering, "Old photos are surfacing. Samuel Jones just popped." Eleanor's own phone buzzed. An email from legal, no public statements on marriage, a text from an investor. What's going on? But the one line she couldn't sidestep was the name. Samuel Jones. It rolled steadily in her mind, pushing aside words like KPI, sentiment, and ROI. The space opened around Samuel. He stood straight, dipping his head slightly, as if apologizing for being recognized. Martha stepped half a pace from the edge, her hand gripping the corner of a napkin. She hesitated. This wasn't something to parade before a crowd, but she had just watched him get turned into a punchline. She raised her voice enough to carry. "If we're talking about Samuel, let me tell the rest." The room quieted instinctively before a housekeeper's voice with years behind it. "Samuel's mother was sick for a long time," Martha said plainly, adding no tears. "They lived on 2 shifts, hers and his. When her condition worsened, the medical bills came like a storm. His first piano, the one he'd saved for through scholarships and side jobs, was sold to pay hospital costs." A woman brought her hand to her mouth. A man slowly set his glass on the table. Martha looked at Samuel as if asking permission. He nodded, eyes closing for a beat. She continued. "He left the conservatory, took night cleaning jobs to pay rent, pay debts, survive. And music." Martha searched for the words. Music became tied to the smell of antiseptic, to white sheets, to the sound of monitors. He locked it away. Arthur Finch added a piece, professional but warm. "Talent doesn't vanish. It buries itself when it has no nourishment." He looked around, placing the phrase where non-musicians could understand. Martha lowered her gaze, then lifted it again, her face firming. "And this isn't just about poverty." She clipped the words. Someone once told him after an audition, "We need someone who fits the hall. Hair should be tidier. Don't play with so much color. Your demeanor needs to be more professional." She didn't exaggerate. Those words were polite and dangerous for that very reason. Another time, a guard blocked him at a stage door, made him use the service stairs, even though he had an invitation in hand. A small gasp escaped from the third row, then sank. Some guests looked at each other, their own words to their staff suddenly appearing in letters before them. The barrier here wasn't brick. It was etiquette, wired into the mind. Samuel heard his name repeated in the room. Samuel, not Buddy. Each time was a small hammer tapping away old paint. He drew in a deep breath, held it, let it out. He didn't want tonight to become his private tragedy in public. But Martha wasn't telling a sob story. She was naming the problem. The polished system that had pushed him to the margins. Eleanor's mind flashed to the checklist she'd sent internally. Staff stay out of the frame. Use service elevator. Don't stand in the lobby during guest check-in. She wanted to defend herself. That's procedure, not discrimination. But behind that thought came another, quieter one. Who writes the procedure? She looked at Samuel and, unbidden, saw the simplicity in his stance contrasted with the complexity of the glass casing around her own life. Arthur Finch gave a small nod to Martha, a thank you for naming it plainly. He added the professional credential. At the conservatory, he topped the piano class 2 semesters in a row, he said. I have an old note from a professor. Deep touch, wide ear, pedal control rare at his age. He didn't mention the times Samuel lost funding because he didn't fit the face of the program. The phrase was too sharp to throw now, but the attentive had already connected it when Martha said, "Fit the hall." A middle-aged man frowned. That still happens today. Another sighed. It never stopped. It just speaks another language. Shame, rare at a gala, was now present. Not loud, but heavy. Eleanor lifted the mic, then set it down. She knew anything she said now would be filtered through the moral lens just raised. She glanced at the PR rep. The other shook her head. Don't defend. Listen. It was advice unfamiliar to someone who lived by steering. But tonight, silence was again in the right place. Martha closed, her voice steady. He doesn't need anyone's pity. He only needs to be called by his name and not be blocked from doors that should already be open. She turned to Samuel, smiling. Tonight, you opened one yourself, with music. Samuel nodded, eyes damp but steady. He looked around the room, at people who had laughed earlier, now sitting upright, at the guard who had blocked him, now slightly bowing his head, at Eleanor, her face blank for a rare second, like someone seeing her true reflection. I didn't leave music because I stopped loving it, Samuel said, speaking about himself for the first time tonight, his voice low, clear. I left because every note I played took me back to the hospital room. I needed to do something simple. Pay rent, pay debt, survive. He paused. Tonight I remembered why I learned to play. Not to get applause, but to be a person. The line clicked a second lock in the room. Recognition was no longer about skill. It became an agreement that before them stood a whole human being. At the hall's edge, the woman who'd begun the recognition said softly, "We've lost you for too long." Arthur Finch replied, as if entering it into the record. "From now on, write it right. Samuel Jones." Samuel nodded, a faint smile. Eleanor Vance stood in the middle of waves moving against her. She knew the game had changed. No more cutting at the PR beat. No more rewriting the narrative with a few neat lines. Before her was a man who had reset the measure of dignity. and behind her, in the phone still buzzing, was a world demanding she keep her word in its true sense. The night from here would not return to its old structure, and the next act, media storm, pressure, closed-door conversations, was already standing just behind the door that had been called open. The "say his name" silence had barely closed when the hall erupted in a storm of phone alerts. Screens lit up in scattered blue dots. Push notifications pinged without pause. A young man shouted, "It's on TikTok!" Another added, "X is flooded with clips." On several phones, the same headline repeated, "Heiress mocks black janitor, then he plays like a genius." Beneath it, hashtag swelled by the second. Samuel Jones. Keep your word. Vance Gala. One viral edit cut Eleanor's Marriage Dare directly against Samuel's Summertime and Sonata performance. A fast-moving news account slapped a small chyron across the bottom, publicly promised marriage. At the door, security reported news vans outside, reporters requesting entry, the hotel's PR fielded calls stacked on calls. Legal messaged urgently. Absolutely no confirmation of any marriage. All statements must be neutral. Two blades of social media stuck out at once. On one side, comments demanding justice piled up. "Respect dignity. Keep your word. Incredible, Samuel." On the other, the shadow side swelled, mockery digging into his personal life, doctored images turning tragedy into a circus. Even the applause was clipped into meme format. Eleanor felt control slip away like coat buttons popping loose. The metrics dashboard in her head, sentiment, reach, risk, flashed red and green like a trading floor. An investor texted bluntly, "Don't let private matters become a corporate commitment." Legal wrote, "Marriage is a personal matter, cannot be publicly binding." PR leaned close to whisper, "One wrong word and we'll spend a week cleaning this up." In front of the piano, Samuel stood still. He watched the crowd spiraling into a vortex of clips. This was not what he had built tonight for. He looked up, his voice calm but clear enough to carry. "We're turning tonight into a circus." A few heads jerked up. He turned to Eleanor. "I suggest we speak in private, not to hide, but to move from mockery to making it right." A ripple of dissent. "No, say it here. Keep your word in front of everyone." Arthur Finch raised his hand for quiet. "If you want the right answer, both sides need to speak to each other like adults." He wasn't shielding anyone. He was protecting the quality of the decision. Martha added a half sentence, leaning toward conscience. "Let them talk." Eleanor met Samuel's eyes. No pleading, no threat, just an invitation. A string inside her slackened. She gave the smallest nod. PR mapped it instantly. Manager's office, second floor. Security opened a path through the sea of people and cameras, forming a corridor out of elbows and polite murmurs. A few shouts followed, but Arthur Finch stepped in with a soft block. "You'll get your answer. Give them 5 minutes." The front row fell quiet, stepped back half a pace. The cyclone swung off Samuel's heels and fixed on Eleanor's back. The office door shut, the noise dropping like a dialed-down volume knob. Eleanor leaned against the table, thumb rubbing the faded champagne stain, a habit when tense. Her phone glowed with incoming calls and texts. Legal team, PR group, 2 shareholders, a reporter. Samuel didn't sit. He stood a measured distance from the desk, hands loosely clasped. "I'm not here to force you into a wedding," Samuel began plainly. "I want you to keep your word the right way, to the person and to the culture of this place." Eleanor looked up. "Keep your word? Can that be quantified?" Her tone stayed smooth but dry. Years of experience told her everything had to be converted into measurable units before it could be managed. Samuel nodded. "It can. 1, a public apology. Use my name. Acknowledge the act and its impact. None of that, if anyone was offended, language. 2. Concrete commitments. He counted them off on his fingers. The Jones Family Scholarship Fund for underprivileged music students, quarterly free community concerts, and bias awareness training for management, starting with you. He paused, eyes steady. 3. Procedural change. Remove the keep staff out of frame rule. Call employees by name. Stop blocking service elevators without cause. Set up listening sessions with frontline staff and an anonymous channel. Eleanor heard training, listening, drop procedures, and felt a flicker of irritation. These, to her, were synonyms for losing control. She swallowed the reflex and asked, "And your part?" "I take no money. I take an opportunity to return to music, to play for the public, especially where music is rare. I'll advise you on building a culture of respect, not on stage, but in hallways, in emails, in meeting agendas." In Eleanor's mind, 2 voices wrestled. The old voice, "This is a crisis. Shut it down. Forget it." The new one, quiet but right. "This is your one chance to do something that matters." She looked at Samuel, realizing what unsettled her most wasn't his demands, but his precise calm. No begging, no bargaining. He was setting the standard. Her phone buzzed again. Legal, only say respect for talent. Commitment to inclusion, avoid keep your word. Too risky. Pwern, if we pivot to Scholarship Plus programs, positive spin possible. Investor, avoid setting a precedent. These arrows all pointed to a safe path. Speak smoothly, do little. But safe was now dangerous. The crowd had already heard, "Keep your word." Dodging it would pour fuel on the fire. "If I do this," Eleanor asked slowly, "will it be seen as admitting to a systemic fault?" Samuel, "If the system has a fault, admitting it is the only start to fixing it." She hesitated a beat at the simplicity of it. She'd been taught since childhood to win, not to admit. But tonight, winning meant being right. "About that line," I said. "I'll marry you," Samuel said. "No one has the right to force marriage. You can keep your word in the human sense. Use your power to lift, not to press down." The words settled into the room like a weight that fit exactly. Not ornate, but clear. They paused. The far-off noise outside the hall was like surf behind glass. Eleanor, for the first time, let go of the champagne stain under her thumb. "I need one thing. I don't want to become a character in someone else's clip. If I agree, I'll say it in my own words." Samuel, "All I need is for it to be done. The words are yours. The work is ours." The door cracked open. The PR rep poked her head in. "They're waiting. The local news is already inside." Arthur Finch stood just outside, not crossing the threshold, asking only, "Are you two all right?" Samuel looked to Eleanor. She took a long breath, not for show, but to choose. "I'll apologize. Announce the scholarship fund, the community concert program, management training, and procedural changes," she said crisply, like listing an investment portfolio, only this time, investing in people. She looked up at Samuel. "You come with me. But when I speak, I speak." Samuel, "I'll stand there to confirm with my name when needed." Eleanor tapped out a quick message. Prep statement. No marriage mention. Emphasize keep your word through action. Legal sent back a draft. Unconditional apology. Plus, specific commitments. She read it, deleted the hedging phrase if anyone was offended, replacing it with "I was wrong." A small move, but it hurt. Before opening the door, Eleanor paused, asking half for business, half for truth. "If I slip, what will you do?" Samuel, "Remind you of your word in front of everyone." She nodded, a nod accepting a binding she'd spent her whole career avoiding. The door swung open. Noise, cameras, lights flooded in like a tide. The social media storm was still there, sharp and cold, but at its center was a small space just agreed upon, a shift from mockery to making it right. And that would be the measure of what came next, whether she would keep her word in action before a city now watching. The doors swung open and lights and cameras rushed in like a tide, but instead of retreating, Eleanor stopped squarely at the mic. Samuel angled just to her right, close enough to share the noise, far enough not to steal the frame. Arthur Finch stood front row like an official seal, and Martha remained at the edge of the hall, still holding the corner of her napkin. Eleanor looked around the room, inhaled, and this time didn't read from the safe draft. Tonight, I was wrong. I disrespected Samuel Jones. I failed to call him by his name and turned an employee of this organization into a shadow. I apologize to him, and to everyone we have ever treated as invisible. The "I was wrong" dropped into the room clean, with no "if anyone was offended" cushion. The PR rep held her breath. Legal fired off messages, but it was already too late, in a good way. She went on, her voice steady. About the line, "I'll marry you. Marriage is not something to be wagered. I will keep my word the right way, through action. Starting tonight, I'm announcing a program of rebuilding and reform." The room leaned toward the mic. Some cameras turned to capture Samuel. He neither nodded nor shook his head. He let the words run their full course. "First," Eleanor said, "we're establishing the Jones Family Scholarship for talented music students without resources, with priority for underrepresented communities. The fund will be run by an independent board. The Vance Group is just the sponsor." She paused half a beat. "I want that name to outlast this evening." A single clap broke out. Not polite, but the reflex of seeing a door being built. "Second," she raised her head, "we'll launch the Keys for Dignity Community Concert Series in Roxbury and Dorchester. Free admission, full union pay for musicians and crew. Samuel Jones will open the first show, and we commit to bringing music to places that rarely hear it." Samuel turned to her and said quietly, "That's the part I agree to." Cameras caught it, quietly anchoring it to the official record. "Third," Eleanor said, "mandatory anti-bias and DEI training for all management, starting with me. We'll hire an independent firm, conduct anonymous pre- and post-surveys, and publish the results." A skeptical "humph" sounded somewhere, PR stunt, but Arthur Finch tilted his head as if marking it. "Measurable means accountable." "Fourth," her tone hardened, "I'm scrapping the staff must not appear in frame rule when not required, and removing service elevator blockages in non-security areas. Starting tomorrow, all managers will address staff by name." She scanned the room. "Anyone who doesn't stay." A wave of murmurs rippled through the staff at the edges. A few instinctively adjusted their name badges, as if to make them seen. "Fifth," Eleanor paused, then said plainly, "We're raising our minimum wage to a true living wage per city standards and adding health stipends for night shifts. Deadline, next quarter." An involuntary gasp escaped the crowd. This was no longer PR. This was budget. "Sixth," she slowed, "every month I'll hold a listening session with frontline staff, with an anonymous channel direct to the executive board. No polished reports, only truth." Eleanor lowered the mic a fraction, then raised it again. "And finally, I'm inviting Samuel Jones to serve as my independent human values advisor for 1 year. Call it humility coaching. He'll have the right to say what I don't want to hear, and I'll be responsible for listening." A faint smile passed over Samuel's face. Not for winning, but for the right thing being named. Camera shutters snapped. A reporter called out, "Do you admit you discriminated?" Eleanor inhaled. "I admit bias exists in my organization and in me. I take responsibility for fixing it. Not perfect for legal, but right for ethics." Faces that had smirked earlier fell silent. Samuel asked for the mic only for a few seconds. Thank you. I don't need a wedding. I need what's been promised to be done. I accept the advisor role not to grade, but to ask, how do we treat people when the cameras are off? He handed the mic back. Clean. Martha tilted her head, eyes wet but cheeks dry. She leaned toward Eleanor as she stepped down. Thank you for saying I was wrong. From tomorrow, call me Martha. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Miss Martha. The hierarchy flipped, but into its right place. In the front row, Arthur Finch spoke just loud enough for the mics to pick up for the background of clips. This isn't a fairy tale, this is governance, and governance means measuring promises by actions. A definition planted among the forest of hashtags. Still, the other side of social media scratched. The hashtag, Magyar's PR stunt, rose alongside Prochont keep your word. One account sneered, a few concerts and it's over. Another replied, living wage is real. The two edges of the internet ran in parallel, but now the checkpoints were drawn. Timelines, programs, fund name, listening session schedule. Truth had a place to land. The PR rep handed over a rough printed timeline. Q1, scholarship applications open. Next month, 2 concerts in Roxbury, Dorchester. 8 weeks, first DEI training. Next week, no staff and photo signs removed. Next quarter, new wage table. Eleanor initialed the corner, not legally binding to the public, but like a self-imposed contract. A shareholder texted, short-term loss. Eleanor replied, long-term risk reduction. She knew she'd have to prove it in the quarterly report, but for the first time she felt a breath of space under the pressure. Samuel turned, offering his hand. Eleanor shook it. No photo op, no performance. Cameras still pressed in, but in that clasp, they split the weight in half. Tomorrow, I'll send the schedule for the first session, Samuel said. I'll invite cleaning crews, security, kitchen staff, the ones who use the service elevator. Eleanor nodded. And I'll take that elevator with them. The words escaped before she could stop them, but they were right. A reporter threw one last question. Do you call this keeping your word? Eleanor looked straight into the lens. I call this keeping my word through reform. See you when we report progress. She set the mic down. No bow, do first, bow later. The room loosened slightly, as if it had just exhaled. The social media storm still screamed outside, but at the eye of it, the frame was built. Scholarship, concerts, DEI, wages and benefits, new policy, listening sessions, a human values advisor. Things that would either take root or expose who broke their word. Samuel looked at the piano for one last beat. He wouldn't play again tonight. The music had done its work, bending the room so words could enter. The rest would be timelines and labor. And as the camera lights lowered, he saw Eleanor walk to Martha first. She spoke quietly, clearly. Miss Martha, thank you for reminding me with the truth. For the first time, she called a staff member by name in front of the whole hall, not to be recorded, but because it was right. The night wasn't over, but law and life had a new agreement. The rest was simple. Keep the word. They stepped out of the meeting room just as the noise in the lobby was cresting. Eleanor walked half a step ahead, but when they reached the edge of the carpet, she slowed to let Samuel come level with her. The PR rep handed her the mic. She didn't look at the teleprompter. I'm Eleanor Vance. Tonight I was wrong. With Samuel Jones and Martha Johnson. With the way I addressed you, my attitude, and the harm I caused to people who should have been respected. She paused for a beat. I apologize unconditionally. The click of cameras moved closer. She continued, shifting from words to a concrete plan with a specific timeline. The Jones Family Scholarship applications open on the 15th of next month. The independently managed board list will be announced this weekend. Keys for Dignity. 2 Saturday nights next week at 6:30 p.m. in Roxbury, Sunday next week at 5:00 p.m. in Dorchester. Free admission, full union pay. Mandatory DEI training for all management in 8 weeks, with anonymous pre- and post-surveys and a public report next quarter. The no staff in photo policy ends tomorrow morning. Service elevators will be opened in non-security areas. Staff will be addressed by name. Wages and benefits. We will implement the city's living wage and night shift health stipend by next quarter. Listening sessions. I will host them every Monday at 9 a.m. in the B1 break room. The anonymous feedback channel goes live tonight. She closed her notebook and looked straight ahead. Our cultural KPIs will include turnover rate, internal satisfaction score, percentage of complaints resolved on time, and the pay gap by function. I am personally accountable for these numbers. A ripple of surprise moved through the hall, not at rhetoric, but at deadlines and metrics being staked. Arthur Finch gave a small nod, like a final stamp of authenticity. Eleanor lowered the mic and turned toward the staff standing at the edges. Miss Martha, thank you. Then to the blue, white, and black uniforms. Tomorrow, if I call anyone Buddy, remind me of my own name. There were a few small, relieved laughs, but this relief had a spine. The PR rep signaled the tech team. Behind the stage, a large screen lit up with a temporary poster. Black background, white text reading, Keys for Dignity, with Samuel Jones's name and performance dates beneath. At the bottom, in small print, a community concert series by the Commonwealth Grand, admission free. No flashy logo, just enough to be recognized. Eleanor didn't take the honorary seat. She stepped off the platform and found a spot in the third row between a security guard and a waitress. She folded her phone face down on her lap. No more looking at dashboards. The room shifted with that gesture. Control lowered a notch, no longer pressing down on the music. Samuel said nothing more. He sat at the piano, the lid closed by a third to sweeten the bass and soften the upper register. This one's for second chances, he said softly, and for those who've been made invisible. The melody he wrote wasn't ornate. The opening motif was 4 notes, up a step, down a half step, back home. Like the way people hesitate, then decide. The left hand kept time like night shift hallway steps. The right hand traced a line so clean you could hear the space between phrases. Midway, he glanced at a shadow of "summertime," not quoted whole, just nodded to, then turned it into a warm harmony. Not sad. He wrote for the present, not for an old resume. Eleanor watched those hands, and for the first time didn't see a performance, but labor. Labor like the cleaning shift she had walked past. Next to her, the guard who had once blocked Samuel rested his hand on his knee, thumbed an old wedding ring, then pulled his hand back to avoid making noise. The waitress on her left counted time with her eyes, her lips holding a faint smile. In the coda, Samuel skipped the fireworks. He brought back the 4 opening notes, softer this time, like a room that had learned how to say sorry properly. He lifted the pedal before the last tone could cloud. Silence fell again, now like a seat just big enough for anyone to sit in. Applause, steady, full, but not loud. When it faded, Samuel rose and gave a small bow, enough to thank, not to repay a debt. He met Martha's eyes. She nodded. "Well done, Samuel." He met Arthur Finch's. Finch replied with his own nod. "See you in tomorrow's column?" Eleanor stood with everyone else. She turned to the guard. "My name's Eleanor. What's yours?" "Robert." "Nice to work with you, Robert. Tomorrow I'm taking the service elevator. You'll show me the way." Robert nodded, the corners of his mouth easing, awkward, like someone being handed back the shape of being seen. A group of guests approached Martha, asking about Monday's listening session. She took out her notebook, wrote down names, and said, "Take service elevator B, but next week everyone uses the front door." Half joke, half truth. Enough to make a few people laugh aloud. The PR rep laid out a hastily printed roadmap on the check-in table. Timeline, points of contact, anonymous email. Eleanor's signature was scrawled in the corner, not for show, but for accountability. A few young staff took photos, sent them into their internal group chat. The first comment popped up, "Call me by my name." The second, "See you Monday." Arthur Finch paused at the Keys for Dignity poster and told a reporter, "The best script isn't hero-villain redemption. It's that after the final chord, we still have work to do." It was the kind of line that, dropped into the close of a news segment, could slow the internet's over-scripting instinct. Don't chase the ending. Wait for the report. As guests began to leave, the "No Staff in Photo" sign in a hidden corner was taken down by the tech crew. They hesitated, looking to Eleanor. She nodded. "Remove it. Don't put it back." The empty screw hooks were left bare, a visible scar of what had been wrong. Samuel stayed until last. He covered the keys with the cloth, his hand resting a beat longer than necessary, like someone closing the door to an old home. Eleanor stepped up. No mic, no cameras. "Thank you for not turning me into someone else's clip," she said quietly. "Tomorrow if I slip, remind me." "I will. And if I keep my word, remind me too." Samuel smiled. "I will, so others can see it." Outside, Boston dropped another shade into night. Inside, people leaving the hall passed the cleaning crew starting their shift. They greeted each other, called each other by name, not perfect, but in the right direction. The last line of the night didn't come from a mic. It came from the way those people looked back at those they had once made invisible. Clearer. Closer. Dignity has no uniform. It has courage. And a promise is only worth as much as the actions that keep it. Have you ever been made to feel invisible or seen someone else treated that way? What would you do to speak up next time? If this story resonates with you, please like, share it with friends, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.